Welcome back to another episode of Bills Mafia Carolina Takeover. I am your host, Owen, and we've got a great episode for you. You ever wonder what it'd be like if you could go back and start the Bills organization over again today, and you get to draft any player that the Bills have drafted throughout their entire organization of existence and field that team? Even if you drafted older guys, they would be younger when you drafted them. Well, that's what we're doing today. This is the all-time draft, building the ultimate Buffalo Bills team.
Bills Mafia. Are you ready? From North Carolina to Buffalo, the Mafia is united. This is your home for the passion, the power, and the pride of the Buffalo Bills. Welcome to Bills Mafia Carolina Takeover. Let's go, Bills.
All right, let's get into this. And boy, the research on this, I didn't realize how many great draft picks the Bills have had in their existence. But more importantly, I didn't realize how many free agents the Bills had, plus how many big impact players the Bills drafted. Before we get into this, a shout out to the Sabres. They had a hell of a run this year. They are back. So looking forward to that season. That's going to be so much fun. And really, quite frankly, it's what delayed this podcast till now, because the offseason bled right into the Sabres. So a shout out to the Sabres. And so looking forward to that season. It just it makes this whole Bills Mafia and the city of Buffalo and Bills fans just awesome. So props to the Sabres in their run there. All right, so we're going to get right into this. So we're going to start at quarterback. So obviously the big old debate, which we had a few weeks ago about Mount Rushmore and who should be the quarterback there. I mean, obviously, if you go back and look here, I don't think it doesn't matter what generation you come from Bills Mafia or Bills fans. I mean, you're looking at two guys, Josh Allen and Jim Kelly. So this one, and I got a lot of comments on this one as well. This one's tough. I mean, this one goes back to the Mount Rushmore thing that we had talked about here. I mean, is Jim Kelly going to be on Mount Rushmore of Bills Mafia? He will be today, but will he be forever? No. Josh Allen will ultimately be the one etched into there. But if I had to draft a team today, and I lived through the 90s, through the Super Bowl era, but I'm going to have to say Josh Allen. I would draft Josh Allen over Jim Kelly right now. 9 years into the season, and I just think Josh is a better quarterback with a lot less Hall of Famers on his team. So I'm going to go Josh Allen on quarterback there. Next one is running back. I mean, I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, the research I did, I went way back. I mean, other than the juice, which, I think Thurman Thomas is the all-time running back draft there. So I'm going to go Thurman. Wide receiver was interesting. I mean, there could have been a few that you could put on here, but I think, if I had to draft one wide receiver, it's going to be Andre Reed. Eric Moulds was on there. Got a lot of comments for him, just like it did a couple weeks ago. But I think Andre Reed is going to be my wide receiver. The tight end. This was the first interesting thing here. And for the newer Bills fans who didn't live through the 90s may or may not know this, but so the premise of this is they had to be drafted by the Bills. And so I chose McKellar as the tight end there. I ultimately wanted to choose Pete Metzelaars, but Metzelaars was not originally drafted by the Bills. He was actually traded from Seattle. So I think in this case, McKellar would be the tight end that I would draft. Now, if we had free agency and trade picks available, I would certainly trade McKellar for Pete Metzelaars, because he would have been my picks. All right, now we head down to the offensive line here. This one, Dion is probably going to be my draft pick. Now, if we're drafting two tackles, then I'm going to have to go with John Fina would be my other tackle, both drafted by the Bills there. The centers, this one was also interesting for the newer, younger generation out there. So the center position, ultimately would be one of the greatest centers of all time, Kent Hall, but he was not drafted by the Bills. He was actually a free agent. He went in to play with the Jersey Generals, so he wouldn't count in this list. So other than that, there was Jim Richard on there as well, but I kind of slated him as an interior offensive lineman. So Eric Wood would be my pick here, which is a stretch, I think, personally. But if I just like with the tight end position, if I was able to trade, I would certainly trade Eric Wood for Kent Hall. Jim Richard, who I mentioned, would be a guard, and Reuben Brown. Those would be my two guards if I had to draft those two there. All right, now for defensive end, for sure, Bruce Smith 100% is going to be one of the defensive ends. The other one here is this one is interesting for me. I went back and forth on this one, and a lot of people did not have this guy that I think should be the number two when they had reached out. Everyone had Phil Hansen, which I get 100%. Phil Hansen, part of the 90s there. But mine would have been Aaron Schobel. And the reason why Aaron Schobel is he is second in sacks. He has 78 sacks in his career with the Bills. Hansen had 61. Relatively the same players, I think. Different era for sure. But I would say Aaron Schobel would probably be my second draft pick over Phil Hansen. If they were on the board, I would lean more towards Aaron Schobel there on that piece. All right, let's get into defensive tackles. We've had a lot defensive tackles here, but I got a lot of people on this one as well. Kyle Williams, totally understand Kyle Williams. I get Kyle Williams for sure. But I'm going to have to go with Fred Smerlas on this one. Yeah, I'm going old school here. Kyle Williams, certainly, and again, different era, but if I'm having to draft Fred Smerlas at a younger age, when he just came out of college, let's say, for example, like I'm going to go Fred Smerlas over Kyle Williams here. Kyle, nice player, leads. I think he leads the Bills in most games in franchise history, but I think Fred Smerlas is a bigger impact at a younger Fred Smerlas than a Kyle Williams on there. Pretty unpopular opinion for sure, because I got a lot of Kyle Williams on there as well. Here we are in linebackers down. Now, this one was pretty cool because I got a lot of submissions on this one. A lot of people picked Biscuit, Cornelius Bennett. However, Biscuit was not drafted by the Bills here. He was actually traded for. So I'm going to have to go Daryl Talley here, and I'm also going to go Matt Milano. Really tough here because certainly if I'm going to trade Talley for Biscuit, I'm going to do that 100%. Biscuit is definitely the better player on Talley and Milano for that matter. But for this example, being a draft pick by the Bills, I got to go Talley and Milano. The other one I got to a lot in my inbox was Shane Collin. Love that dude in the 90s. However, Shane was drafted by Washington before he came to the Bills, so he wouldn't have been eligible. However, with that being said, if I was able to trade both linebackers, both Cornelius Bennett and Daryl Talley to get Shane Conlon. I'm sorry, if I was able to trade Daryl Talley, Matt Milano for Shane Conlon and Biscuit, 100% I would do that. But for right now, the linebackers are going to be Talley and Milano. Cornerbacks, look, the Bills have drafted a lot of cornerbacks in recent years, but looking back at kind of like the 90s Bills, there wasn't really the few that stood out. I mean, obviously you got to draft Trey White. I think he's probably got to be one of the greatest cornerbacks in Bills history. The other ones you got to look at are Odomes and Winfield in the 90s there. So I went with Trey White, and I actually went with Taron Johnson here, and I left out Nate Odomes and Winfield. So I kept it kind of pretty recent. I just feel like Taron Johnson, just the position that he played with the Bills, kind of revolutionized that nickel position there. That I felt like that deserved him the credit to be drafted there. But certainly I had some write-ins for Odomes and Winfield, and certainly could do that. This one here, for me, if Odomes and Winfield were on the board and Trey and Taron Johnson were off my board and Odomes and Winfield the next two and I had to draft them, I am pumped up for that. But I think for this course of action, Taron Johnson and Trey White are going to be the number 1 and 2 cornerback positions there. Christian Benford was also one that I got a ton of. Obviously, some younger generations there. Not as good as Taron Johnson and Trey White, in my opinion. Trey White, younger Trey White. Let me preference that by saying younger Trey White. And I don't think he was as good right now as Odomes and Winfield, so he's honorable mention. Safeties, well, we didn't have a lot here. So I went with Henry Jones and Mark Kelso. If Jordan Poyer fell and Cole Bishop and Henry Jones and Mark Kelso are off the board, I would have picked him. Safety to me, really just haven't had a huge standout. In fact, looking back at it, safety really wasn't a huge focal point for the Bills. And really, it may not be that case now, but we'll see going forward with Leonard's defense. And then lastly, kicker. So this one was interesting. Certainly, I got a ton of Tyler Bass, understandably so. And then I did get some Scott Norwoods, which was interesting considering, all that had accomplished, in Buffalo there. But the one thing to keep in mind, Scott Norwood was not drafted by the Bills. He was actually an undrafted free agent. So therefore, I went with Tyler Bass. And if you go back and look at the kicking history of the Bills, not really that impressive until you get maybe back in the later days, like in the 60s. There's probably, some arguments for a couple guys there. But if Bass fell on my draft board as kicker, I would be okay with that. Okay, so there you go. Here's my draft picks. If I had to do this, Josh Allen, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, Keith McKellar, Bruce Smith, Aaron Schobel, Dion, John Fina, Eric Wood, Jim Richter, Reuben Brown, Fred Smerlas, Daryl Talley, Matt Milano, Trey Wright, Taron Johnson, Henry Jones, and Bass to round out the kickers. If you didn't get a chance to tell me what your draft pick would be like, or did I miss somebody out here, or am I completely nuts with any of these positions? Reach out to me, leave a comment, send me an email, BillsMafiaCTO@gmail.com. And until next time, be good, do good, God bless, go Bills.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Bills Mafia Carolina Takeover. Thanks for tuning in and repping the Mafia with us. Don't forget to subscribe, drop your Mafia mail, and join us next time as we bring the passion, the pride, and the power of the Buffalo Bills straight from the Carolinas. Let's go Buffalo.